cellaring facility, and we do a lot of events. We do a lot of tastings as well. We've been importing wine for almost 20 years, so we've got some really good imported wines that we sell, great allocations of top producers. And about 10, 12 years ago, we started selling South African wines, and we got in at a really good time because South African wines just started booming around 2010. Yeah, so we get allocations of some of South Africa's greatest wines, and we have a team that's able to sell them. And tonight we're going to talk about the skills that we think are required to sell fine wine. Why are we doing the skills challenge? Well, I think it's important to discuss it because certainly I think everyone's in a little bit of a limbo land, but really we're trying to stay positive. And after reading some of that news today about NDZ and lockdown until level 1 and no booze sales, it makes you utterly depressed and hugely frustrated. But if you have something like this, this platform to try and share skills and just be a bit more positive about the future and about what you can do now, I think it's important to be positive. There's a lot of fear, there's a lot of negativity out there. Let's try to be positive. We also have a lot of time on our hands and people are on their devices. So there's a captive audience, and I think it's a great time just to share skills. Wine Cellar has been relatively successful over the last 2 months of lockdown. We've been pre-selling a fair amount of wine, and it's just been very lucky for us to be involved in a business that can continue during lockdown, even though we can't deliver any wine. And we want to help. And we see that the hospitality industry is going to really take a lot of hits during this COVID-19. And perhaps we can communicate some of our skills, and it might help some hospitality workers out there that are looking to look to another industry or perhaps going to fine wine. Which brings me to my next point is, what is fine wine? And we get asked this on a daily basis. Well, really, it's the difference between a commodity, an everyday beverage, and something that translates a little bit more, that brings a little bit of magic into your glass. Grapes get through a whole process into your glass, and fine wine gives you something a little bit special. It can't be replicated. It's generally a little bit more expensive. You have to pay about 100 to 150, maybe 200 Rand. But it is a nuanced product. It's a complex product, and it's something that requires a language. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Fine wine is not a beverage. It's a complete product in itself. And then really, why are we talking about skills versus qualifications? And we have a lot of CVs that come across our desks, and qualifications are great. But if you don't have the skills in order to sell wine, your saleability as an employee really goes down. So we're going to highlight those skills and talk about how they can lead to more successful sales, and more successful sales leads to more profitability, which leads to perhaps more people in the supply and a chain moving forward. And you might get more accountants that are required, more logistics that are required, and it can grow the workforce. I think South Africa is underdeveloped on the fine wine scene. We've been working with international producers for 20 years now, and we see the professionalism that is out there in wine sales in France, in America, and Europe. And there is very little professionalism in South African fine wine sales. And maybe we can help just translate what our skills are and what leads to more professionalism in there. We've also developed this incredible skills set in our team, and we're going to talk about them now, but all of the skills are in-house, so we don't have to outsource anything. And if a campaign or a new idea comes along, we're quite flexible, and we can launch something like this webinar very quickly. For instance, if Jancis had to tweet, she's just tasted a new wine, maybe it's the Gabriel's Kloof Amphora, and she gives it a big score. Our team needs to jump on that and be able to sell that product immediately. Get on the phone with the supplier or the winery and sell it faster than anyone else. And those in-house skills really gives us the flexibility and speed that you require in today's business, because today's business is fast, it's digital, it's competitive, and you need to be one step ahead of the game. So I think that there are a lot of businesses out there, wineries, bottle stores, distributors, that if you have more skilled fine wine professionals, I think it can drive your business and increase sales. And that's really, really important. So we've got 10 skills, and I'm going to start off with the first skill, and that really is acquiring knowledge, acquiring and developing your knowledge, which sounds very much not like a skill, but it is. And maybe I'll tell you about my journey. I got into wine about 20 years ago, and my first job was at Hamilton Russell Vineyards. I was 20 years old. I was very, very young, and I had a passion for wine and an energy for wine. And I started selling wine in the tasting room, and I enjoyed it. I found that I liked selling wine. I liked communicating wine, and it worked well for me. I was offered a job by Kevin, the winemaker at the time, a job in the winery, and the winemaking part didn't really resonate with me. I like the sales part, so that's why I'm selling wine almost 20 years later. How have I acquired this knowledge? Well, it's really through people, and I can see James right there, and James was a critical part of my wine knowledge acquiring. He was a mentor of mine when I worked at the Vineyard Connection, not long after that. And so I think people are so important in acquiring knowledge. You need to communicate with people. You need to find mentors. You need to find people that will share their information, because wine is such a magical thing. It makes you want to share wine. It makes you want to talk. It makes you want to communicate, eat and drink too. But it's just such a wonderful industry to be in, that people love sharing information. So if you are looking to increase your knowledge, talk to people. That's really, really important. Read, study. There's so much information out there on websites that's free. Some of it's paid for, but you can read to your heart's content and find out more and more about wine. There's some great courses, of course, out there. WSET, Cape Wine Academy. You can go all the way to the International Master of Wine if you wish. There's a lot of content out there. And then lastly, in acquiring knowledge, and the most exciting thing is tasting. You have to taste a lot of wine. James and I did a calculation a year or two back that we taste about 5,000 wines a year. And that is a lot of tasting. We really do it for you, the consumer. It's a tough job, but you have to taste a lot. And that really builds your knowledge as you go along. So how does this impact in selling wine, really? Well, you need to have more knowledge than your consumer, because once you have more knowledge, you have a bit more power in the transaction, in the communication. If you're able to talk more fluently about a subject, even with a professional in another area, you're able to basically one-up them on the sale, and you'll have the power in that conversation. That doesn't mean you can bullshit. You have to be completely and openly honest. And if you don't know about something, you need to say, well, Mr. So-and-so, I don't know about what percentage New Oak is in this wine. I will find out and I'll let you know. But knowledge is really, really powerful. And just to end off the knowledge section as a skill, about 2007, I was in a wine shop, and I happened to see this bottle lying in the bargain bin, and it was a bottle of GS 1966. So I asked the lady behind the counter, and I said, have you got any more of these? And what's the price? And she said, oh, no, I think there's just one, and it's 10 Rand. And I thought, okay, well, I'll take it then. And I bought it for 10 Rand, and I was lucky enough to share it with Dirk van Niepoort and a few other wine aficionados, and it was an incredible wine. And not more than 10 years later, we sold that wine on the auction for 30,000 Rand a bottle. It's one of South Africa's icon elusive wines. Now, if that shop assistant had read the same article that I had, which was one by Michael Fridjon, saying that the GS66 was arguably the best wine he's ever had, then they might not have sold it, and they might not have sold it for 10 Rand. Who knows what they would have done with it, but that knowledge of your product really would have given you a lot more profit, more sales, and more success down the way. So that's my story. And now I hand over to James Peterson, and he's going to talk through two other skills.
Hi there, guys. Just to introduce myself, I'm James Peterson from Cellar. I've been with the company since 2014, and I confess that I drink wine for a living, and I've been doing it for more than 25 years. So wine is my thing, and I love drinking wine, and I just love wine. What is the skills? We've quickly identified about 10 skills that we're going to try and convey to you tonight. And I'm going to tackle one of the boring ones quickly and get it out of the way. But it is crucial. We didn't bring it up because it's not important. And that is to have an attention for detail. What does attention for detail mean? One example, because it relates to many things. It relates to a sense of professionalism. Roland touched on the fact that, when you travel the world and you work with international markets, you pick up their sense of absolute detail right down to the last minute. But I just want to mention numbers. Tasting and drinking wine is obviously something everybody wants to do. Most people want to do. I mean, it's great. It sounds amazing if you say that you drink wine for a living. But the numbers are really crucial. If you want to be someone who sells wine and fine wine, and you want to be successful in that fine wine industry, you need to understand numbers. Why? One thing, you're there to sell wines. Wine has got a price. There's VAT involved. Wine's prices go up every year. And wine's got a vintage. A vintage is something specific to a product. It's a detail. It's not Coca-Cola. I like to say that we don't sell Coca-Cola, we sell wine. It means that a vintage makes a product something different. So that's the second number. Then you have a number of how many bottles of a wine is available. Wine is finite. It's not an infinite product that you just can get more of. You have to be aware. You have to be holding on to those numbers. So you've got 3 numbers already. Then you've got another number. Where does this wine come from? So you've got latitude and you've got geographical place. So the detail of wine is essential. There's no other product that's got all these layers on it. So that's where one little take on what it means to have an attention for detail. So I think is an absolutely crucial skill. And to add to that, other details is to make sure you know the story of a wine, make sure you get the name right. There's a big difference between a Batard Montrachet and a Montrachet. They might just sound the same to you initially, but there's nuances and detail. So I hope that comes across, and I am hammering at it a little bit, and Roland gave it to me specifically because it's been something that I've been nurturing and holding onto for 25 years. Whenever I work with someone, is that detail is that crucial.
Actually, I must interject there, James, because I remember working for James almost 20 years ago, and he gave me a long list of wines to prep for a customer. And after he looked at it, he threw it, well, he didn't throw it back at me, but he shook his head and he could immediately see there were about 5 or 6 mistakes that I'd made. And he just said to me that, if you want to work in this industry, you have to have attention for detail. Otherwise, you're just not going to get there.
So that's a crucial skill, we think, at Wine Cellar, and really important. We can't kind of focus on it more or stress it more. But the other important skill, and Roland has touched on it quite a bit, obviously there's a lot of love that you need to have for wine. There's a passion. The passion comes from drinking the juice, drinking what's in this glass. And what's in this glass, to understand it, you need to taste the wine. So tasting wine is about digging into it. But something, digressing into these skills, we need to think about what's going on. And I came up with a word now where I said you have to taste with application. You have to apply yourself when you taste. You have to commit when you taste wine. Every time, all the time. David Clark is giggling at us only tasting 5,000 wines a year. But the thing is, we drink promiscuously. We taste as many wines as we can. We go on a journey of discovery. My wife will get upset with me when I'm out with the wine people and we're opening one bottle after the other. There's 4 people of us, but we open 15 bottles of wine because we want to taste something else. We want to discover, we want to know. And that is the core of tasting. But it's no use if you're just drinking those wines and you're not committing to them and you're not applying yourself. So tasting is the juicy, delicious bit about your wine skill. And it's absolutely crucial to be a fine wine communicator, because it is the part that's going to give you confidence when you're talking to people about selling wine. And this links on to the knowledge that Roland spoke about that you have to have. And I think Joe is going to touch on wine language, and that you have to own that, because confidence is crucial when it comes to selling wine. Confidence makes people relax, and wine is complicated, and you want people to be calm about buying wine, and you want to sell them the right wine. So if you taste a wine and you apply yourself, you know that this wine sits in this bracket, will fit those customers. Is this 300 Rand bottle of Chardonnay priced correctly? And is it a big style, round style, or a linear focus style? Boom, move on, taste it, but make sure you put it into your database. I think that's all from me. Those are 2 really crucial skills: attention to detail and taste with an applied mind and with commitment. Joe, we move on to you. I think it's time for you to talk about the language of wine.
Yeah. Hi, hello everyone. My name is Yolette, and I'm talking about the wine language and communication. I I was a winemaker by trade, so that was my background. I studied it since 2005 and made it since 2008, and then joined Wine Cellar in 2018. So, I mean, I've studied across the world and was lucky enough to harvest as well across the globe on all the continents. And so my specific role here as Wine Cellar is the fine wine sales, and I focus on the international wines. Mostly everything that you don't see on the website is what I will try to sell you. And so from my winemaking background, that was very technical, and that was a very specific language skill set that I had. And starting at Wine Cellar, I had to acquire a new one or learn the language from Roland, from James, how to sell wine and how to get customers to trust me, to build a relationship. Because like Roland said, you know, qualifications are great. And I had many from a winemaking side, but how does that translate? Do I have actual skill to sell wine? So I think, you know, that's the same. If you move to a new city or a town, or you start a new job or a hobby, you need to learn the language, the lingo, or, you know, just the jargon. And so basically learning the language of wine can transform the way you taste. And like James said, the better you taste, the better you can advise your customers and help them feel confident in choosing the wine that they want. So, I mean, describing wines are part of our daily jobs, but it's important that we communicate this effectively and interestingly to our customers. And this has to happen across all platforms, whether you write an offer or you get on the phone or you WhatsApp or Instagram or live tasting. You have to do that, like James said, with confidence and knowledgeable. I think when somebody trusts you, they will buy from you. And as we mentioned at the onset as well, you know, there are kind of different sub-communities in the wine world. So you have different cultures. You have the winemakers and the viticulturists. You have the merchants like us. You have the critics that have a very important role. And then you have the consumers. And I mean, I guess a lot of you in the hospitality industry will know much better than I, will be able to do it much quicker than I can, is when you get a customer, you have to gauge really quickly where they are at, and you have to meet them at their level, and you have to speak their wine language. When you make them comfortable, they're confident and they're excited. I think, you know, customers have thousands of wines, of options to choose from, and it's our job to make that choice or that journey to that choice fun and interesting. So yeah, from wine language wise, I think that is really important. And then also, like Roland said earlier about a conversation and steering a conversation, unlike now, which is a monologue, it's a conversation with your customers. You know, you have to listen to them. You have to understand what they like. Don't offer them Burgundy when they like Pinotage or Merlot or something different. But you also have to educate them. So you're constantly talking and getting to know each other through this. And finally, I think not only is it important to communicate well to your customers, but it's very important to communicate effectively with your suppliers, whether they are local or abroad. If you get that wrong, you have the wrong wines to sell. And then also to your colleagues. I mean, wine selling, well, a lot of wine, it's a team sport, you know, and you have to have the same vision. Everybody has to buy into that to, you know, to get to the goal. And I think, you know, the South African wine industry, as we're trying now with a skill challenge, in a way, it is one big team. So, you know, we all have one vision with that. And so finally, sorry.
Just wrap it up. We need to move on to the next skill.
Yeah. Okay, I was timing myself. Yes, I just wanted to say, I mean, starting at Wine Cellar as a winemaker, it was quite different. And it took some time to, you know, for us to figure out what am I doing there. And, you know, and after say about a few months, I felt like, okay, I know what I'm doing. And then after another few months, you understand more. So I think it's also, you know, from the company side, it's a long-term investment if they employ somebody, because it's just not overnight that you know what you're doing and you know your colleagues. And I think I'm giving over to Johan now.
Well, I just want to put one thing there into perspective. You know, Yolette sells very expensive wines, and last month, for instance, had to allocate some Montrachet at 25,000 Rand a bottle. And you sort of You take that in your stride now, Yolette. But if I told you 3 years ago that you'd be selling Montrachet at 25,000 Rand a bottle, you'd probably laugh at me. And so you've learned to develop that skill quite quickly, and it's incredible. That's part of your rhetoric now. And it's the communication comes 100 different ways, doesn't it? I mean, WhatsApp, you probably want to kill your phone when you have these customers that phoning you or WhatsApping you throughout the whole day just so that they can talk about the intricacies of a certain vineyard in Burgundy or Bordeaux.
Yeah.
Anyway, you did super well. Thank you, Yolette. So now we're moving on to Johan, and it also talks about attention to detail, but it's really more about business and numbers. Let's hear from Johan.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Roland. So maybe a short background just on myself. So I grew up without much exposure to wine, to be very honest. So fine wine wasn't even mentioned. And when I started finishing high school, I wasn't sure of what I wanted to do after school, and I got in touch with a winemaker through my brother, and she offered me a job for a year to come and just work on the farm and see what it's like. And so I thought I'd just go and work there, spend a year on the farm and clear my head. So I went to the farm and I worked the harvest, and I pruned vineyards, and I had a short stint actually in sales, and actually quite similar to your experience, which you mentioned earlier, Roland. I found myself not as much drawn to the winemaking at that stage, but I was just intrigued by wine and how it works and how wines can be different. And I remember just a short story when we would be sitting in the cellar and have these verticals of tasting through wines. And I thought to myself, either these people are nuts or they're all lying, because smelling pencil shavings and forest floor, it's just that it's these people are crazy. So what I do is I'd go to the tasting room at the end of each day, and I take all the half bottles that were on the way to be thrown out, and I just take them home I stayed on the farm in a little cottage, and I just taste through all of these wines just to get a sense of what is wine like and how are wines different. And I think that was a great building block just in my own understanding of how wine works, and building a bit of a database in my own mind, as James said earlier on, is how these wines work. And then at the end of that year, I said to myself, look, I really want to get into wine. So the logical conclusion is, go and study in fine wine capital. So I went to Potchefstroom, obviously logical conclusion. And there's a lot of wine, but it's not wine, it's brown wine, unfortunately. Often mixed with all kinds of other things. And I spent time there studying BCom, and I did a postgraduate in trade and economics. And that really gave me a lot of exposure to numbers and understanding data analysis and applying that to solving problems. And in the end, I got a job in the fruit industry. So I've got a visitor here, guys. I got a job in the fruit industry, and I started working in fruit trade, sourcing fruit from producers and selling it to Middle Eastern markets. So I did a lot of traveling there. But that whole time, there wasn't a narrative for me to this job I was doing. There wasn't really a connection for me. And I was always reading about wine, learning about wine, buying wines for myself that I'd hear of, tasting it at home. And then I had the opportunity to leave the fruit industry and get involved with Wine Cellar. And I got involved in the investment and brokerage part. And the skill I really want to touch on that Roland mentioned is working with numbers, or numeracy, the skill to understand numbers and data and how to solve problems from it. And I think if you're speaking about fine wine, as Roland said in the introduction, fine wine is not something that's replicated by anyone or any place else. It's something that's unique to a producer, to a vintage even. And understanding how these wines build value over time, I think, is critical. Having a little bit of an understanding of investment and investment language, I think, is crucial. Just as a general rule in life, but I think that's critical to fine wine sales as well. Understanding how wines build value over time, and how wines that do build value over time, because not all wine appreciates over time. Certainly only fine wines do, and the rate of appreciation by wines are not always the same. They differ as the market demands more or less of a certain product. So there's a bit of supply and demand coming in. And I think the great thing for me about this skill called numeracy or numbers or whatever you want to call it is it's not something that you need a formal degree for. Sure, if you have the opportunity to go and do a CFA or an actuarial degree, that's fantastic. But I think where we are in the world today, you can really get yourself onto some great material just on the web. What is investing? How does value build over time? How does it affect, or is it related to certain industries? Is it all industries? So I think those are critical skills in the fine wine sphere, understanding value and how it appreciates over time, and how it affects a producer or a consumer. And so this is also very valuable and takes a lot of time. But yeah, I think that's the exciting part for me about fine wine, is that it's not just tasting and thinking it's great, as James said, but there's a real application of how does value build over time? How can we build value for a producer, for a business, for the consumer? And yeah, that really excites me about wine and numbers. So cheers.
Thank you, Johan. I don't think there's anyone else in South Africa that has Johan's job. He sells vintage wines, of which there is very little out there, and he sells investments, and we sell a lot of investment wine, and we have done quite a lot over this lockdown period as well. We've had the time to communicate with customers and tell them about the investment potential of South African wines, and it's been incredible to have that slant to our business. Okay, moving on now to skill number 7. It is Amy who's going to tell us about 7 and 8.
Hi guys. So I most of you probably know my name at the bottom of an email, because I send out hundreds of emails every day to all of our customers, but maybe not all of you know my face. I basically sit at the front desk of Wine Cellar, and am kind of the happy face when people walk in. I answer the phone. I deal with all incoming inquiries, and I'm kind of a bit of a busybody around the office. My wine journey started not that long ago, actually. I was in corporate sales in London. I'm South African, but I lived in the UK for 15 years. I was, as I said, in corporate sales. Wine drinking was, I'd like to call it a hobby, just drinking a lot on the weekend. Started taking it quite seriously when I went to a wine tasting at my local wine shop and met Alex from Claremont, as well as Peter from Blank Bottle. And they were there talking about South African wine, and suddenly a whole lot of stuff kind of made sense to me about why I drink wine, and South African wine suddenly became really exciting. In London, you can drink pretty much anything you want, and South African wine isn't at the forefront of bottle shops and isn't on the shelves at Sainsbury's. But I was like, wow, this is cool. South Africa has a lot to give in terms of wine, so I started drinking more of it. I was able to get the opportunity with family to move back, and I thought, what better time to make a hobby and a passion of mine a career. So I did a harvest at Reinecker in 2017, which again was just absolutely mind-blowing when you don't actually really know an awful lot about wine, specifically winemaking. And I was 100% hooked. I was hooked on Stellenbosch. I was hooked on biodynamics. I was hooked on wine. And through the next few months, very, very lucky to have been chosen to work at Wine Cellar with an incredible team, a very knowledgeable team. And my knowledge of wine and wine tasting has just completely expanded tenfold from there. I've got a level 3 WSET, which really helps. And basically my main job here is multitasking. I do a little bit of everything. I invoice, I email all of our customers. I'm on the phone a lot. As I said in the beginning, I deal with all incoming customers who are actually really important. We're based in Observatory in a really random industrial park. And if you want to come here and you walk through the door, you want to buy wine, or maybe you don't. Maybe you think we're a shop, but if I took you downstairs, you'd realize how serious we are about wine and selling wine. So multitasking is a very acquired skill. James always calls it plate spinning, and every day I've got about 50 plates spinning on little wheels everywhere. My brain is going 100 miles an hour. Sometimes I have to just walk into James or Roland's office and be like, what am I doing? It's quite a tough job, but it's really enjoyable because no day is the same. No day you are tasting the same wine. You're never dealing with the same customer. You're never dealing with the same inquiry. And there's a buzz about the office and about my job that I absolutely love. To gain a multifaceted...
That's not just the wine though, Amy, eh? The buzz.
No, I mean, I do like to drink in the office. It is funny when people come in and I've got 2 glasses of wine sitting there after a tasting and I'm like fully functional. I still do my job very well, don't I, Roland? But that's another part of my job. I have to drink while I'm working. So, I mean, that's serious multitasking there.
Yeah, just to be clear, Vane, on the multitasking is a really important skill in selling fine wine. And Amy probably has the most to deal with that because she gets inquiries from left, right, and center, and then she has to do this and that and prioritize which skill or which task needs to come first, right?
Yeah, so mainly I just deal with a lot of lists. I prioritize my day when I get into the office. It usually goes out the window, but I try and stick to it as much as possible. And just being confident in what you're doing and knowing when you need help. Basically, that's multitasking. I can deal with a lot on my own, but sometimes I just need to ask for help. And the team that I work with is very, very helpful in that way. If the phone rings more than 3 times, people know Amy's not getting it. So somebody needs to step in and help me. So yeah, that comes with, obviously, as I said, emails, people walking in, industry events, going to tastings myself with James or Roland or Yolette in the evenings. So days can get pretty crazy, but it's all fun because I've got a passion for what I do. On the other side, on the other hand,
the commitment to tasting, I mean, that's what Amy's alluding to here. You know, you've got a 9-to-5 job of paying attention to detail, but you still need to taste wine. And that's also part of that commitment, is you have to want to taste wine.
Yeah, so when I came for my interview, Roland said, you're going to have to work 1 evening a week, which is the tastings that I was going to get onto because I manage all of our tasting events that happen here at Wine Cellar. So I was like, yeah, okay, sure. I mean, one night a week, fine. But actually, it's more like 2 or 3 nights a week because, I mean, it's fun going to tastings after work in the evening, but it's also quite tiring. And that is another evening of your week that you don't get to sit at home and chill out. You are technically working, talking to industry people and learning and tasting new vintages, and it's amazingly fun and really great. But yeah, it's part of the job.
Yeah, so I think tastings and managing tastings, Amy, that's an incredible skill to have. Eventing, I mean, I've heard once before that eventing is the most difficult, the most stressful job in the world. And if you can have that skill to handle events under pressure and from A to Z, handle them correctly, I think that's a really important skill to have. And it doesn't sound like a very complex skill, but Amy, I mean, if you've got 40 people coming for a tasting and the glasses are not set up correctly or haven't been cleaned correctly, or the wine's the wrong temperature, or you've opened the wrong wine, that's a tough environment, isn't it?
Yeah, it can be a pretty stressful day. Wednesdays are pretty hectic in the office, specifically for me. It usually goes pretty well until 5 o'clock when everyone's coming in an hour, and then I start stressing and running around like a chicken with my head chopped off. But 90% of the time, everything runs smoothly. I think everyone who comes to our tastings are there to learn and to buy wine. So it is very important that we do it correctly and we get it right. There's so many things that have to be covered, from pourers being in the right place. Obviously the wine list, opening all the bottles a few hours before to make sure that there's no cork taint, having them the right temperature. again, a very stressful part of the job, but we seem to get it right. Selling on the night, at the end of the tasting, people want to talk about wine. People have drunk a bit, they're excited. You need to stay on at the end and chat. People want to converse about wine, and then the day after, following up and finding out how people liked it and stuff. And yeah, events management isn't something that I had ever done before, but through a bit of trial and error in the beginning, I feel like I've kind of got it down. And yeah, the whole team kind of chips in, and I think we get it pretty right most of the time.
Yeah, just not to put any stabs into the South African wine industry, but we've been dealing with Bordeaux and Burgundy and the great producers from around the world, and often when you send an inquiry, it comes back quickly. It comes back with all the information, and the number of times it happens in South Africa where we send an inquiry and we get nothing back, or we have to really try and find information or find out if something is for sale. That shouldn't be the way to sell fine wine. You should have all the information at your fingertips, and you should respond quickly. And I think we lack a bit of professionalism on that side, which brings us to Paige, and she's certainly not going to be selling you wine directly, but she's a really important part of the sales team, because often when we run a sales campaign, Paige is the one that actually coordinates the campaign. So Paige, maybe I'll ask you, 5 years ago, did you think you'd be doing this? Would you be tasting and selling fine wine?
No, not at all. If I look back 5 years ago, well, actually it's longer now, but my wine dream started when I was training to become a chef. And well, that is very much linked to the wine industry, and that while you're training to be a chef, you have to do all the courses in wine to understand that side of the business. And while doing that, I fell in love with the wine a little bit more than I was supposed to, and decided to change my career track. I got a marketing degree and got into corporate wine sales, and I haven't looked back since. But over those 5 years that I've been at Wine Cellar, I have completely changed and grown up 100% from where I started. And it links back to what everyone in the sales team is saying. Wine knowledge is very important. It doesn't happen overnight, but it really makes you better at doing your job in this industry that's very geared towards that technicality side. So I'm just going to briefly talk about, what I do at Wine Cellar that very much links to the sales team. I'm more involved in the marketing, but what I do get and what I do want to say to somebody who is going to be working in the wine industry, you need to learn how to deal with your marketing team, because they actually have a lot of information at their disposal that they can help you do your job better. So because wine sales and most sales are becoming more digitally focused these days, you need to have a certain level of digital literacy. And when I say that, I mean, you need to understand what SEO is. Your content and your sales messages will not only be in private emails and phone conversations any longer, but they're going to be used across websites and landing pages and product pages and social media. And you need to understand what Google looks for and what you get rated on, and what makes you successful in those domains. So by understanding how to write your content and to speak your message in a way that is translatable to those platforms is very, very important. Another thing that I've noticed is becoming more and more important in the wine industry is wine is a very lifestyle orientated product. And so you really need to understand social media and how to use it in your personal capacity to create a personality and a lifestyle brand of your own that's linked to your day job. And what lots of salespeople don't realize is that, like I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of tools that your marketing team has that they can share with you. For example, most companies are now sending out newsletter campaigns. And so trying to figure out what your open rates are like, what your click rates are like, what your unsubscribe rates are sitting at, is going to help you understand what you're doing right and what you need to improve on. It also helps you understand who your customer is and who you're talking to. So that's one aspect of it. Another thing is your Google Analytics or your website analytics, Google being the most well-known, but you get to see how your content is performing. And in the old, more paper styles of sales and telephonic sales, you didn't have metrics like this to use. And so it's very important that you ask those questions and know what to ask your marketing team. And finally is your data and trends. Things are changing all the time. Your customers are changing, how they're searching is changing, and being able to access that information and that data makes your speed a lot faster in meeting that. And I think what we've learned at Wine Cellar is that speed is quite key. So yeah, that's my experience with working with the sales team. You need to know how to deal with data. You need to know how to read reports. You need to know Excel and Excel formulas backwards. I saw someone laughing at that earlier, but that's 90% of what I do. And yeah, that's my advice there for skills that are valuable when it's taking on and tackling sales in a very digital age.
And what would you say to people? How do you deal with a lot of different personalities? Do you find that challenging, or is it something have you picked up a little skill in handling 5 different salespeople with different ideas about things?
Yeah, I love it. I think that it's really great that we have 5 very individual voices going out to our same customer base. Otherwise, everyone would be getting the same message. And no, it's not difficult. Everyone loves wine, and that makes it easy.
We're all such easy people, Paige. Come, let's be honest,
Okay, well, let's just recap those 10 skills. Number 1, acquiring and developing your knowledge, really, really important. James spoke about 2 skills, attention to detail and taste, 2 really important skills. Yolette spoke about wine language as a skill, and we talk about that a lot in the office, and especially when we're sending out a newsletter, we need to make sure that language translates exactly to the style of the wine, the quality of the wine, the value in the wine, the price of the wine. That language is so important. And communicating with our customers, you can't just dismiss the communication. You have to love it. You have to enjoy it. You have to engage with it. And then Johan spoke about numeracy and understanding finance to some extent. And then Amy, important skills of multitasking, which I think is a really underrated skill you're going to use across every single job, and managing events, such a big part of wine. And I'm sure if you're in the hospitality industry already, that should be your number 1 skill, really, to manage an event. If you're waiting tables and you're doing 50, 60 packs a night, you've got incredible skills at events and following up with everything. And then Paige spoke about communicating with a team, coordinating a team, and then all the digital skills that are required to work in fine wine sales, and especially on an e-commerce platform moving forward. So those are the 10 skills. And what else we're going to offer from Wine Cellar is an opportunity to come and work with us, and that's going to be in the form of 2 apprenticeships in the warehousing logistics space, where it's a bit more of an entry-level position where you can come and learn from scratch about fine wine, about the labels, about everything to do with fine wine. And you'll do a lot of packing, you'll do a lot of moving. That's one thing about the wine industry. If you didn't have a sore back at some stage, you didn't do your apprenticeship correctly. And I remember distinctly one year when I was much younger, I had quite a sore sort of lower back pain, and I was wondering, now I've been drinking a lot. Is that my liver, or is that my back that's actually really sore? But we're all going to be moving a lot of boxes, and there are 2 apprenticeships for that. And then, of course, the fine wine sales is what we're talking about tonight. I think that we're a sales-led organization. If we find the right salespeople, it can drive any business out there. And it really just means you need to have someone that with the right skill set in fine wine sales. So 2 apprenticeships. Come and work with us for 3 months and learn about fine wine sales. And then next week, we're going to focus more on wine marketing from the likes of Mike Radcliffe. We're going to talk to some influencers and social media experts like Bubbles Highland. You'll see on social media. She's also a wine rep, so she comes from a different side. We're going to speak to a commercial manager from Ken Forrester, Low Stratum, which will give you a different aspect of fine wine. And then next week, the week thereafter, we're going to talk about wine production, and that's going to be really exciting because we've got people like Johan Reinicke coming to talk about wine growing, and he's just incredible, putting into words what he does on a daily basis. Donnie Karinis, another great wine grower. We're going to speak to Tinashe, who was an ex-som at Test Kitchen. He's got his own wine brand now, and he's a winemaker, and we want to hear about all the skills and issues that he's had with his wine brand. And Chris Molyneux, who runs an incredible operation now, a large winery. What are the skills required to run that winery? So hopefully we've got a few questions that we can answer on our page, and that really concludes the 10 skills.
Sure. So if you open the question and answer tab, you'll find some of them. But we've got Ken Reek that says, for a country that doesn't have a strong wine culture yet, how are you selling wine to a new generation market?
Sure. That's a very good question, Kanik. And James and I often look at each other and we say that we're not the marketing arm of wineries. That needs to be done themselves. They need to have a brand presence in place in the market. That's not our job. Our job is to convince customers to buy wine. So you're completely right. That's a conundrum, and I think it's a big case study at the moment. The next generation of wine drinkers are not engaging with wine like we did, or our previous older generation did, and that's super important. I think what we're trying to do is translate honestly and with fun, with information, and I think that's the best way from my side. Anyone else on the team?
I also think what's important here is that, I mean, there's a movement happening. You know, there's a generational shift. But it's crucial that the communication of wine is marketing is lacking, I guess. So I think in the next video or the next webinar, that's what we'll see, is how to address that. But marketing needs to understand who are the drinkers and grow the drinkers. You know, there's wine is a two-way street, because part of what we're doing is to show people what is coming and where things are going. And then the other part is to give people what they want. So if you're in the merchant or the fine wine or the sales area, you are busy selling wines to people and at the same time growing the industry. While what I think Ken Reek is asking is more addressing the marketing guys, is how are you getting new people into the market? And that's a solely marketing thing. So I think the marketeers next week should try and address that question. Paige?
Cool. I'll put it on our list for sure.
Okay, what are the other questions there, Paige? The second one was also from Kenrique. I'm sure fine wine. Okay,
There's an interesting one about personality versus skills. What sort of personality traits are you looking for?
That's a very good point, because one thing that you can't have as a skill or acquire as a skill is an attitude. And James and I feel that attitude is just the most important thing. If you were during this lockdown locked into Netflix and you were utterly despondent, it's probably not going to bode very well for you on a health-wise basis, but also on a personal basis. I think you have to be positive. You need some energy. You need to have a positive attitude. James, we see that a lot in the people that we deal with. And frankly, as a business, we like doing business with people that we like and the people that are positive. If you walk into our office and you have a long face and you're utterly negative, that's not going to bode well for anyone. I think you have to be positive and you have to have a positive attitude in order to be successful.
Yeah, I think it's crucial. Something that I picked up is that, you know, energy and attitude and the willingness to learn. You know, so if you halfway clever and you've got some skills, but you've got the energy, you could be dangerous. But if you have very little skills, you've got the energy, but you've got the right attitude, you can be used. If you're super bright and you have a bad attitude and you've got a lot of energy, you're the worst kind of person to employ. So attitude is a very interesting mix when you put those kind of three little elements together. And attitude is crucial, but attitude is about wanting to, it's about learning, it's about commitment, it's about applying yourself, and it's about a lot of things that is perseverance. It's not about taking it easily.
Yeah. Any more questions there you want to answer, Roland?
There's a complex question here about how many fine wine producers believe they have to sell to retail outlets. I think the market is changing rapidly. We get competition today from the wineries, and that's completely reasonable. If wineries can go direct to customer, then you know, we've seen this in Bordeaux, for instance, over the last 2 decades. Bordeaux as a region, they were quite upper crust, and they didn't want to speak to their customers. So they invented the system of en premier, where the negociants sell and talk to their customers. And then they've realized that they don't then have control of their market. And in order to do so, they're now dealing a lot more direct with customers, or finding out who their customers are. And wineries are doing the same thing, because technology is allowing you to communicate and sell directly to your customers. We believe there's still a place for a merchant, and we're still growing as a business. But again, if you can get direct to the customer and you've got the skills to sell fine wine, I think that's applicable to any wine business.
Yeah,
Great.
I saw a comment earlier that almost relates to that, where someone asks, is our lack of fine wine culture, does that influence our secondary market, or vice versa? And I think it almost speaks to what you just said now, Roland, is that because of I think a lack of fine wine culture, our distribution and the way we do things are still very much are behind in what we're seeing in the rest of the world. And I think that's where there's still an exciting space for Wine Cellar to grow the market.
All right, there's an anonymous attendee saying that how do you deal with difficult customers and guests that aren't even able to talk or show themselves? A good point. We're still figuring out this web Zoominar type function. But yes, tough customers. I think we are in customer service, and this is something that we've learned the hard way over the years. You have to find a balance between giving the customer what they want, but also being fair to yourself and honest to yourself. And we have had customers that have been erring on the ridiculous side, or just being unreasonable. And I think you have to be firm. But that said, a free bottle of wine, or a thank you in a bottle of champagne, or just a personal message to your customer goes a very, very long way. Because at the end of the day, we're a luxury service, and we don't need customers. Customers don't need us in order to survive. They do love buying wine, but we're a luxury service, and we have to make them happy. That's for sure.
Can I answer this one about the online market substantially increasing over the pandemic?
Yes, please.
Well, it has. I mean, we've seen a huge growth, and I'm just hoping that it's something that we continue to see customers stick by. Once the retail stores are open, that they continue to trust that online retail to customer, that last mile. And I'm hoping to see that continue into the future.
Yeah, just looking at the numbers, American online retail was at about 10% penetration before lockdown. So 10% of retail sales were online e-commerce. And now, 2 months later, we're already at 20%. So it took 10 years to get to 10%, another 8 weeks to get to 20%. In South Africa, we were probably at 2% before lockdown, and we may be now at 4 or 5, who knows? We don't quite have that data yet, but on a Wine Cellar level, we've jumped about 250% on the online sales during lockdown. And just a point to make there, we're pretty good at pre-selling wines, and that's really where Wine Cellar has worked well in this lockdown. We've trained our customers to drink the wines when they're mature later on. So the fact that they're not able to get delivery now, it works quite well, because many of them are popping it into their cellar at Wine Cellar, or are very happy to take delayed delivery. Okay, I think there are more questions coming in here. David Clark said something about personality. How does that drive wine sales? Well, I mean, that's of course, I think that's in any industry. You need to have a personality to sell, and Yolette's always got a smile on her face when she's selling wines, and even when the customers utterly irritate you, you have to maintain that composure and that friendly attitude. Yolette?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that's when, a big skill that I learned at Wine Cellar was customer service. Because as a winemaker, you deal with grapes and wines, and they're slightly more quiet and less opinionated. So yeah, I think diplomacy and tact and just staying very calm works really well. But I mean, then James is also, he's a very calm influence, I think, on the office. So that helps too.
Thank you, Joe. It's important. Yeah, I mean, customers are crucial, and Roland touched on it. Fine wine is not a necessity. Fine wine is something to behold. There's something magic about it. But I think part of what David Clark's question was also how much of the producer's personality plays a role in them selling wines. And I think, David, that addresses the kind of, it does play a role, but what it speaks to is their efforts in terms of their marketing. How good are they at marketing their wines? How good are they telling their story? How much are they applying themselves to their attention to detail? And how good is their communication in terms of what's available, what's going on? And then I can't create someone else's X factor. They have to have their own X factor. And that is marketing 101. Hopefully some of that will come through in next Friday's webinar. So I think that does play a role, David, but I think for those reasons.
Yeah, another question from Dean. Thank you. And I've got lots of friendships with our customers. It's amazing when your job becomes your vocation, becomes your friendship circle, becomes your life. The wine industry is very small, and you become very connected within the industry. And I think at Wine Cellar we can phone anyone up in the industry and consider them to be a compatriot or a colleague, and that's incredible. And how do we remain so sincere, Dean? Well, really, it's all about if we promote a wine, we have to believe in it. We have to believe in the value of it, the taste of it, and we have to be sincere about what we offer. If at any moment we're bullshitting the customer, they'll smell it. And wine is a very long-term process. I've sold wine to some of our customers 15 years ago that they're only drinking now. And they phone me up and say, wow, I'm so glad I bought those wines 15 years ago. And they were, next to nothing back then. And that long-term relationship you build with honesty, you can't build it any other way. Great. Well, folks, if there's a question about Gauteng. How do you find the fine wine market per province? Well, I think we know that it hasn't changed radically over the last while. We have a lot of Johannesburg customers, a lot of Durban customers, but the concentration is still in the Western Cape. Paige, you probably have that data.
Yes, very much in the Western Cape still. Joburg is climbing every year, and we're also seeing a good climb in Durban, interestingly enough. But yeah, still Western Cape at the top.
Great. Well, folks, it's been a pleasure to have you in our company, even though we couldn't see you, but we could see the names, and there were some great questions. And if you got any suggestions for the next 2 workshops, please let us know. Hopefully you still have some wine at home. If not, then order some and we'll send it to you directly after lockdown. And we're going to talk about further skills in the next few weeks, and maybe this transcends into something else. Because in this really dire space that we're in South Africa, I think the only thing that we can do is share skills, share information, and try and work towards a better future. It doesn't look like the government's going to help us, so we need to do it ourselves. And that's part of what the skills challenge is. So thank you very much. Paige, is this going to be downloadable somewhere?
Yeah, it's we'll get the Zoom download soon, and we'll post it either on our YouTube, but it is live on YouTube at the moment, so it'll probably be there tomorrow morning.
Great. Any other closing comments from the team?
Cheers, everybody. Carry on drinking. Don't stop drinking. Don't stop loving wine. I mean, that's what we do. We talk to you about loving wine, and you talk to us about loving wine. Don't stop doing it. Sali.
Yes.
Yes.
Chin chin.
Right.
Come to.